According to MIT's 2025 report, 90% of employees are using their own generative AI tools at work, but most lack clear guidelines on what's safe to use and what isn't. At the same time, companies are rolling out enterprise solutions like Microsoft Copilot, only to find that half their team are secretly using something different that better serves their needs. People are moving in all different directions. Meanwhile, 95% of companies are still getting zero return on their AI investments. The problem here is that most companies lack a clear AI strategy. So in this episode, we'll cover how to distinguish between an AI strategy and a backlog of tasks, and why many companies tend to skip the strategy part. 2, the core components that I highly recommend that you include in your AI strategy. And 3, how to fund and manage your AI roadmap when AI technology is moving so quickly. So in this episode, I'm going to talk you through how to create one. If you're new here, I'm Quinton Hiini, and this is episode 4 of the Q&A for Business framework, which I created based on my real-world experience leading global digital transformations and helping companies get real value from AI. Just a quick heads up, this is one of the more dense episodes because AI strategy has a lot of moving parts. So what I've done is added chapter markings below so you can jump straight to the parts that you're interested in, or you can just download the framework and templates and get started right away. Alright, so let's start with one of the most common mistakes that companies make, which is confusing a backlog of AI projects with an AI strategy. So your backlog might include things like running some AI pilots, trying new tools, or AI training for your employees. And these are all really good things to have. It's good to explore generative AI, particularly because it's quite new for everyone. But the problem here is when you try to scale this exploratory approach across your entire organization. So what you need is an AI strategy, which is a set of choices about where you're going to invest, what problems you're going to solve, and also importantly, what you're not going to do based on your actual business priorities. It's based on understanding your business priorities and how AI can actually help your company win. So what happens when you skip the strategy part is things start to get a little bit messy. So you have teams doing their own things, you end up with a bunch of different tools that aren't connected to your business strategy, all this kind of thing. A common example that I've seen a lot of times is a lot of companies rush to getting enterprise licenses, let's say for Copilot, for example, without properly understanding what workflows this was supposed to be for and what problems these were actually supposed to solve for their employees. What happened was many companies mandated these tools without realizing what the actual use cases were. And so what would happen is that, for example, developers would already be using Claude or Cursor or using their own tools, and then suddenly be forced into using something that just wasn't quite what they needed. So what would happen is that you would have your company enforcing use of a tool that isn't quite what your employees need. So for example, a lot of software developers using Claude or Cursor instead, and then suddenly having to use something like Copilot, which is good, but might not necessarily be good for their specific needs. For example, Android developers who prefer to use Gemini. These kind of things. What happens is when you enforce these tools without this sort of strategy, people get frustrated and they stop using the tools, and often they start to think that AI just doesn't work. And that's because there's a misalignment between the tools they might be using and the actual pain points that they have. So your team start building up a lot of resentment, and then suddenly you've wasted all this money on licenses because people don't want to use them. I want to call out that I'm not saying that you shouldn't use Copilot or anything like that. What I'm saying is you just need to be intentional with the use that you have. Different teams have different needs and use cases, and so it's just important to make sure that this is all coherent and well thought together, and it's connected to your company's strategy. All right, so let's talk about how you actually build this AI strategy. So look, I help many companies build their digital transformation and AI strategies, and what I found is that there's 4 important areas that you need to think through. So the first is your company ambition and vision. Where are you going and why? What are the business outcomes you're trying to achieve? Now, this is stuff that companies should do outside of AI, but it's important when you're thinking about your AI strategy that you're taking this into consideration. You're making sure that the AI enhances what your existing strategies are. Second is your portfolio or your roadmap of initiatives that you're going to actually pursue and in what order you're going to do them. Third is your foundations and capabilities. So things like data infrastructure, training, all this kind of stuff, which is often underestimated. And the fourth is your execution plan. How are you going to deliver this? Where's your project plan, your change management plan, all of these kind of things. So let's walk through each of these now. And also, if you want to just download the QAI for Business framework and get the templates there, feel free to go ahead and get started or to follow along. So a quick note on the format of the actual AI strategy. So typically, it's not just one document, it's a collection of different artifacts. So for example, I like to have Miro board for tracking ideas and brainstorming. You then have a number of different presentation decks, which you present to different people and stakeholders in your organization. And then you need some kind of backlog as well, so that you're continually updating the work and you're tracking the progress and you're able to communicate that to your company. So let's start with the vision and the alignment. So this is about connecting AI to your actual business goals. For example, if your company is focusing on revenue growth, cost reduction, customer satisfaction, you need to make sure that those ambitions permeate through the AI strategy that you're creating. So whenever I'm running strategy sessions with companies, what I like to do is start off with a half-day workshop where you're pulling in all of your executives and your center of excellence and other stakeholders, and you're really trying to get them in a room to make sure that you can get clear first on what are your priorities. What I find is one of the biggest parts of creating a strategy is really just getting the right people in the room and making sure that you're getting the broad opinions and perspectives from the company, and then you start narrowing them down into something a bit more coherent. So I will say it's critical that you get C-level buy-in to this meeting. Ideally, you'll even have the CEO in this workshop so that you can make sure that their opinions are represented and that they have this buy-in to support the outcomes of these strategy sessions. Without executive support, you'll continuously run into conflicts regarding resources, competing priorities, and it can be tricky to try and resolve these if you don't already have C-level buy-in. So this is really the opportunity to get everyone together and make sure that you are aligned on these things that are most important. So what are the company's top priorities for the next 6 to 12 months? Making sure you're crystal clear on this before you even start talking about AI is super critical. Next, you want to bring the use cases that you've identified from your previous lead finding workshops. Those I covered in episode 3, so go back and check that out if you like. But essentially, that's the research that you have done, seeing firsthand the problems that people have in your organization. And now is the opportunity to start prioritizing them. So what you want to do here is go through them and decide which of these are in fact the biggest priority for your company so that you can determine where to put your investment. You do need to make sure that you're forcing some prioritization decisions in this meeting because your company only has a set amount of capacity and not everything can be priority. So I like to use tools like an impact versus feasibility matrix or WSGIF, but you do need to get explicit on what the goals are and what trade-offs your company is going to make. If you're adding new priorities or new initiatives, what are you going to take off the table already? Or do you need additional resources to get the work done? If that's the case, just remember there's ramp up time, there's training, all this kind of stuff. So this kind of detail is really important to understand what these ambitions are, what the new initiatives are, and how you're actually going to get them done. So getting alignment and consensus on this type of thing takes a lot of sessions typically. One tip I'll give you is that if you know that you have skeptics or you have people with very strong opinions, what you might want to do is meet with them beforehand, try and get into their headspace and try and understand their perspective before the workshop, just so that it makes it a little bit easier to manage these kind of things as they come up. So the outputs of this meeting should form the basis of your AI strategy. And of course, this is something that you continue to revise, particularly with the rate that AI is changing at. It's very important that you make sure you have mechanisms built into your governance so that you're continuously reviewing these things because you need to move quite dynamically with AI, as with any innovation. Okay, so now that you have this list of strategic priorities, what you need to do is you need to turn this into a trackable roadmap that you're able to share with your organization so that you can keep stakeholders like C-level and other people across the organization up to speed. Having something visually that they can see so they can see the progress, but also for yourself, for managing the work as you're progressing through the implementation. It's important to remember that you're not just selling this transformation to senior executives, you're selling it to the people in the organization as well, whose jobs have to change because of AI. Mapping these initiatives out in a roadmap also helps you spot dependencies and clashes and these kind of things. So typically I like to work with an AI center of excellence or your AI champions to manage and monitor the AI roadmap that you've created. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail later in the episode and in future episodes as well. But the third thing that you need for your AI strategy, make sure that you're covering, is your enabling foundations. So a lot of companies think that AI is just a tech project or a tech rollout. And what happens is they get caught off guard by all of the additional hidden costs that are involved with an AI transformation. And not only the hidden costs, but the cultural impact that this has on your organization as people are having to find new ways of working with AI. So for example, there's often a lot of data infrastructure work, cleaning and consolidating, making sure that your internal systems are connected correctly. There's a lot of governance overhead, security compliance, all these kind of things. And people forget. So it's important that you're transparent with all of these different enabling features and that they're somehow placed into your backlog as well. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is how you actually fund the AI transformation and how you get budget approved for it. So traditional planning assures that you know exactly what you're going to do and how much it's going to cost. But AI is exploratory, and you often don't know which initiatives are going to deliver value until you actually try them. So for me, I think it's very important that you have a flexible budget. What I mean by this is instead of having a rigid locked-in budget where every line item is accounted for, you need something that's quite flexible, a transformation budget. So if you're a company running it agile or safe, you'll probably already be familiar with this concept. It's called lean portfolio management. So what you might do is ask for a certain amount of money. So rather than allocating it to specific initiatives up front, you have it as a pool of money that you're able to use to explore and try pilots so that you can see where the real value is coming from. It's always very interesting to see the things that you think are going to bring the most value up front, but then when you run pilots, they don't necessarily work out the way that you were thinking. So that flexibility is super important. Having this flexibility also means that you don't have to go back to finance continually. It's good to make sure that you had ongoing dialogue with them about how priorities are changing. And for example, I like to do regular monthly check-ins where you just align and make sure that finance is clear with where the money is going and that you're also still being accountable for it. But that flexibility to change and to pivot with AI in general is super important, particularly with the rate that AI is changing at the moment. However, for a lot of companies with more traditional budgeting approaches, it can be quite difficult to make changes. Money is allocated quite far in advance, and you may even need board approval to make sort of changes. But it is super critical that you start these discussions around how you can move towards a more agile budgeting approach. Now, if you've had your C-level executives in these initial workshops, that discussion becomes a little bit easier because they also see and they also realize that the pace of innovation and AI change is really quickly, and also they need to move at the same pace when it comes to these kind of things. So I have worked with companies where they haven't been able to make these changes quickly, but what you can do is start with smaller steps. So, for example, ask for pilot budgets, ask if there's any opportunity for quarterly reallocations, and just try to get them on board with the idea that flexibility is necessary when you're trying to stay competitive with the rate of change of AI. Now, in terms of specifically managing the roadmap, I mentioned earlier that I like to work with a center of excellence. Typically, what I like to do, and I come from an agile background, so I like to have 2-week or 1-monthly sprints where we meet, we deal with any roadblocks, we adjust priorities, but also we look for quick wins that we're able to share with the organization to keep them motivated and get people on board. Also, communicating your lessons learned through the process is also really good for transparency. Now, in addition to these 2-weekly or monthly sprint cycles, I think that it's super important that you have quarterly business reviews as well. So if you've worked in SAFE, you would be familiar with PI planning, which is every quarter making sure that you're pulling in all stakeholders and you're taking a step back to make sure that what you had determined as the priority 3 months ago is still the priority and that the resource allocation is still correct. One thing I will say is that your company already probably has quarterly business reviews. The goal is to actually get in on those rather than making a completely different track for governance, because you need to make sure that your AI initiatives are an integral part of the strategic conversations. So if this means getting a spot at the quarterly business reviews or at the PI planning events, then that's what you need to do. Having that integration with what you're already doing also signals to the company that this isn't a separate thing and that this is an essential part of how the company is going to reach their goals. All right, so let's quickly recap what we've covered in this episode so far. So the first was about making sure that you understand that a strategy is different to a collection of AI initiatives. And the strategy is super important to make sure that you're in alignment with what's priority and where you're going to allocate your resources. The second is that your AI strategy will have various components depending on the different audiences. So it's not just one document. It's, for example, a roadmap, presentations, Miro boards, all this kind of stuff. And it's a living, breathing document that you need to continually update as you're moving through your AI transformation. And the third is that prioritize backlog or roadmap just to that visibility and for your internal tracking so that you can make sure that things are on track, and that also that you work either with a center of excellence or champions to make sure that that roadmap is being maintained, that any roadblocks have been addressed, and that also you have news that you're able to communicate to your company about quick wins, that kind of stuff. And then the flexible budgeting. As I mentioned, it can be quite difficult for companies to move towards that model, but if you're not able to, at least start those conversations and see if there's some way that you're able to do this. All right, so as I mentioned, you can download the QAI for Business framework and the templates in the link below. If you've liked this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. And also just a quick shout out to our sponsor to this episode, Alexandra McCulloch, Kia ora.